Look at that. These are cones, pine cones off the tree above our heads. Kind of heavy. I wouldn't want one of those things to hit me in the head when it falls. Whoop. We've got various different sizes, little pieces and parts here. All around. I take these things sometimes and throw them in the compost pile. They do eventually break down and become compost just like everything else. But these pine trees and the pine needles and pine cones tend to be a little more acidic, I guess you could say, than, you know, like regular leaves from trees and decomposed wood from other trees and things. So the pH level in the compost may be a little off if you put things like this in there. But, you know, who knows? Sometimes it's good to do that. Sometimes it's not, depending on which crop is, which crop likes. Can you see me? I don't know if you can see me or not, but anyway, I was doing some thinking today, and I was thinking that I hear a lot of people talk about prepping. I hear a lot of people talk about what it is to be a prepper. When I start looking around and I think of the things that I could do here, to ensure my future food security, I guess you could say. I think of having gardens. I think of having chickens so that I can have eggs. My gardens, of course, would give me vegetables. I do have 2 pear trees. I've got 1 apple tree. I did have 3 apple trees, but I cut down the other 2 because they never did produce anything, and one of them was diseased. So I went ahead and cut those 2 down. But I have 2 pear trees and 1 apple tree. I need to trim them back. But that would be fruit. I've got a grapevine that's growing. I did have 3 grapevines, but 2 of them didn't do very well and kind of, went to the wayside. I have a root cellar. There's things that people talk about these days that they say, this is prepping. But what I see is what used to be a normal way of life. When I was younger, I'd hang out, with some of the older people that, they always had gardens, they always had chickens, they always had cows. Some of them had goats. Not very many at that time that I knew of had goats, but they always had fruit trees. They always had berry vines around. They always had, their hunting gear and their fishing gear, and they would go hunting, they'd go fishing. I can remember many meals where the meat on the table was what we had gone out and hunted or went and fished for. The vegetables in the meal were vegetables that were grown in our gardens. That was a normal way of life. There was jellies that we'd eat, right, that were made from what we found on the property. There was muscadines, blackberries, sometimes there were blueberries. other types of berries. Uh, there was grape jelly, there was strawberry jelly. People grew their own strawberries and grapes. They grew all kinds of things in the gardens. I can remember wonderful pies. But pretty much everything that was set on the table for those meals was either hunted for, fished for, grown in the gardens, or went out and just went out in the woods and the fields and found them and picked them and brought them home. That was a normal way of life, a normal way of being. So when people talk about prepping, I think of a normal way of life. A lot of people these days don't see it. A lot of people have not experienced it. They look at that and they say, wow, that's a totally different way of being, a totally different way of life. But it's not. When you look at the world's population and the people, I'm going to say 80% of the world's population are still doing that. They're still fishing and hunting and gardening and going out and about and collecting their food instead of going to the grocery store. So I was going to make a video on prepping, me being a prepper, officially a prepper, but I don't think the modern day view of what prepping is necessarily what I think I want to present as what I'm doing. I want to say I'm gardening. I want to say I'm, raising animals. I want to say that I have fruit trees, and I'm going out and I'm getting, the pears off the trees. And I want to say that, I'm going out and I'm getting eggs from the chicken coop, and, going to the gardens and getting, what I need for the meal. Going fishing and coming home with fish, for the meal. Maybe once in a while going hunting. Filling the freezer up with deer meat or periodically, a rabbit or a squirrel. When I was a kid, man, we had rabbit and squirrel all the time. We had catfish. Man, we'd go out fishing and we'd collect all kinds of fish, mostly catfish. And we had wonderful, wonderful catfish dinners. Wonderful. So when I think of being a prepper, honestly, I'm not thinking of prepping per se. I'm thinking in terms of that's a normal lifestyle of what we had back then. That's a normal lifestyle for a lot of people now, these days. So, I'm not really a prepper. I'm going to do things like preppers do. I'm going to grow my garden. I'm going to have my chicken coop. I'm going to have my rabbit hutches with rabbits. I'm going to have my worm bins, my worm beds, my compost, my gardens, my fruit trees. I'm going to go fishing. I might even do some hunting. That's me. I see that as a normal way of life. That's the way it was, and that's the way it should be. And that's the way it is. There's probably rabbits living in these piles of wood here. I remember my grandpa, my dad's dad, out in the fields back behind his house, he would make piles like this purposely for rabbits to live in. And then he would go out there and he would put his foot out there like this and just kind of give it like that, and every once in a while a rabbit would run out, right? And he'd that's how we'd rabbit hunt at times. Other times he'd just go wander around and run across them. That's not why I did this here. I did this here because I had a lot of wood that was trimmed back and stuff that came off the trees, piled them up. I didn't want to burn them at the time because, you know, it was a dry season, so I left them here. Now we're in a cold, wet season. Oh well, I'll talk to you later.